Midnight. The kind of bone-chilling cold that seeps through your parka and gnaws at you, making every breath a razor's edge. Sarah Walker, 35, gripped the steering wheel of her black Lexus SUV, rubbing her gloved hands together, waiting for the light to turn green. Exhaustion clung to her like cheap perfume. It had been a marathon day at the table, her downtown diner, a place she had built from grit and hustle, managing a crew that was always one server short, dodging last-minute food delivery disasters, and making sure every single customer walked out with a smile. That was her life. She loved the grind, the chaos, but tonight, it had drained her dry. A glance at the dash clock, 12:42 a.m., almost home. The Indianapolis streets were deserted, just the lonely sweep of headlights in the distance. She nudged up the volume on the stereo, letting the soulful voice of Jill Scott wrap around her. The heated seats were the only thing keeping her from turning into a human icicle. Then, the rearview mirror exploded in red and blue. Damn it. Sarah frowned, checking the speedometer. 34 in a 35 zone. She hadn't been weaving, no sudden stops, no reason in hell for a pullover. Her stomach clenched. She signaled, eased the Lexus onto the shoulder. The flashing lights followed, relentless. Taking a deep breath, she reached into the glove compartment for her registration and insurance. Her hands were steady, but her pulse was a drum solo in her chest. She'd been through this rodeo before, not often, but enough to know the drill. Her window was already cracked when two officers materialized at her car. The first one, a hulking guy with a thick-set neck and a Midwestern drawl that could cut steel, leaned down. Badge glinting under the streetlights, he was Deputy Mark Miller. License and registration. His voice was flat, devoid of any good evening or what seems to be the problem. Just an order. Sarah handed over the documents, keeping her other hand in plain sight on the wheel. "Officer, can I ask why I'm being stopped?" The second cop, a shorter woman with eyes like ice chips and blonde hair pulled back in a military bun, shifted her weight. Officer Jennifer Davies. "You were driving a little erratic back there, ma'am," Davies stated. No room for question. "Anything you want to tell us about that?" Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Erratic? Officer, with all due respect, I just got off work. I'm heading home." "Where do you work?" Sarah exhaled, the cold air pluming in front of her face. "I own a restaurant. The Table, downtown." Miller smirked, a slow, condescending curl of his lips. "Oh yeah? Big shot business owner, huh?" The way he said it made Sarah's teeth clench. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Sarah's stomach plummeted. "For what?" Davies rested a hand on her gun belt. "Ma'am, step out of the car." Sarah swallowed, her gaze flicking between the two of them. Arguing was pointless. She unbuckled her seatbelt, slowly pushed the door open. The cold hit her like a physical blow, biting through her coat instantly. Miller gestured towards the rear of the SUV. "Stand by the trunk, hands where we can see 'em." She did as she was told. The silence of the night amplified everything. Her own breath, the frantic thump of her heart, the crackle of the police radio from their cruiser. Davies circled her Lexus, a flashlight beam slicing through the back seat. "Have you been drinking? Tonight?" "No." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I swear no." Miller crossed his arms, his gaze lingering on her face. "Your eyes look a little glassy. Maybe you're under something else." A knot of dread tightened in Sarah's throat. This was going exactly where she feared it would. "I'm not under anything." Her voice was even, controlled, despite the panic rising inside. Davies stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You know, you're acting a little defensive. That's usually what people do when they have something to hide." Sarah took a slow, deliberate breath, fighting to keep her temper leashed. "I don't have anything to hide." But they weren't listening. She could feel it, the way this was spiraling. She just had no clue how low they were going to take it. Sarah stood still, the night air a relentless knife. Her fingers curled into her palms, but she forced herself to keep breathing steady. She had done absolutely nothing wrong. Davies tapped her flashlight against her palm, studying Sarah like she was a bug under a microscope. "You work in a restaurant, huh?" Her voice was suddenly casual, almost friendly. "What do you do there?" Sarah's jaw tightened further. "I own it." Davies raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Oh, so you're the boss." Deputy Miller chuckled, a low rumble in his chest, shaking his head. "Bet you don't like people telling you what to do, then?" Sarah didn't answer. She wasn't playing their twisted game. Davies took another step closer. "I'm going to pat you down, just a routine check." Sarah's stomach flipped. "For what? I'm not carrying anything illegal." Miller smirked, a flash of teeth in the darkness. "So you are carrying something." Sarah's eyes snapped to his. Heat flared in her chest. "That's not what I said." But it didn't matter. Davies had already grabbed her wrist, spinning her roughly towards the car. Sarah gritted her teeth as cold hands ran down her sides, over her pockets, pressing into her jeans. The humiliation was a burning brand, hotter than the freezing air. Cars whizzed by in the distance, headlights slicing through the dark, but not a single one slowed down. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe, to stay present. Davies stepped back. "You check out." Sarah turned around, crossing her arms tightly across her chest for a sliver of warmth. "Can I go now?" Miller rubbed his chin, pretending to consider it, a cruel glint in his eyes. You're acting real impatient, almost disrespectful." Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. "Here it comes." Davies sighed, like she was genuinely disappointed in Sarah. "You know, I think maybe you need a lesson in compliance." Sarah's pulse slammed against her ribs. "Excuse me?" Miller grinned, wide and predatory. "Drop down. Give me 20. A sharp, disbelieving laugh escaped Sarah's lips. "What?" Davies folded her arms. "Push-ups. Right now." Sarah let out a shaky breath of disbelief. "I'm not doing that." Miller shrugged, all feigned nonchalance. "All right then. We can take this another route. I can say you refused a sobriety test. We impound the car. Maybe book you for resisting." Sarah's stomach dropped through the floor. She looked from one to the other, searching their faces for any flicker of humor, any sign this was some sick joke. But their faces were stone. They were dead serious. She glanced around. The street was empty. No one was coming. It was just her and them. Rage burned through her, but what was she supposed to do? Argue? That wouldn't end well. Fight? That would end even worse. She had one choice, a bitter, humiliating choice. Without a word, Sarah dropped to the freezing pavement. Her palms hit the icy concrete, the cold biting through her gloves like they weren't even there. She gritted her teeth and started counting. 1, 2. Miller whistled, a mocking sound in the quiet. "Look at that." She listens. Davies chuckled, a brittle sound. "Maybe she isn't as entitled as I thought." Sarah's arms trembled. The cold was merciless, shooting pain through her fingers and up into her wrists. But she refused to stop. 10. 11. She could hear them talking above her, their voices laced with amusement, laughing at her. Her blood boiled, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing it. 15. 16. Her breath came in ragged gasps, puffs of white in the frigid air. Her body screamed in protest, but she pushed through it. 18. 19. 20. She pushed herself up slowly, locking eyes with Miller. Her breathing was ragged, her muscles burning, but she wouldn't let them see her break. "Can I go now?" Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Miller tilted his head, as if actually considering it for a moment. Then, he waved a lazy hand. "Yeah, get out of here." Sarah turned on her heel, forcing herself not to run back to her car. She got in, slammed the door, and locked it. Her fingers shook as she reached for the ignition. The two officers stood there, watching her, smirking. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to take one last steadying breath before she pulled away. She didn't look in the rearview mirror. She never wanted to see their faces again. But this wasn't over. Sarah gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned bone white. Her whole body felt like it was on fire, but not from the cold. It was rage, humiliation, the utter powerlessness she had just felt on that desolate street. She should have said something. She should have refused. She should have. No. She knew exactly what would have happened if she had pushed back. And it wouldn't have ended with her driving home. The soft glow of streetlights washed over her face as she sped through the quiet streets of Carmel. She wasn't even sure how she had driven home. One moment she was on the pavement, pressing her shaking hands into the ice. The next she was pulling into the driveway of her 3-bedroom house. She cut the engine and just sat there. What just happened? Her chest was still heaving, her fingers still trembling, her knees aching from the concrete. She flexed her hands, rubbing them, trying to coax back some warmth, but it was no use. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from her best friend, Tasha. "You good? Long night?" Sarah stared at the screen, the words blurring. Am I good? No, she wasn't good. She had just been harassed, humiliated, abused by 2 cops who thought it was a damn joke. She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking to the small black camera mounted on her dashboard. The dash cam. Her pulse kicked into overdrive. With stiff fingers, she reached forward and pressed the rewind button. The small screen flickered to life, and there it was. All of it. The flashing lights, the officers' smug faces, the moment she was forced onto the ground like a common criminal. She could hear them, their voices dripping with condescension, the veiled threats, the casual laughter. Sarah's hands curled into fists. It wasn't just her memory now. It wasn't just her word against theirs. It was real, and she had proof. For a second, she hesitated. She had been down this road before. Maybe not to this extreme, but she knew how these stories usually ended. A complaint, an internal investigation, officers getting a slap on the wrist, then back on the street, same as before. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Not this time. Sarah grabbed her phone and opened her contacts, scrolling past family, past staff, past friends, until she stopped on one name. Gregory Fields, her lawyer. She hit dial, because she wasn't about to let this slide, and she damn sure wasn't about to let them get away with it. Sarah sat in the car, listening to the dial tone, her heart hammering like she'd just run a marathon. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then, "Sarah, you all right?" Gregory Fields, her lawyer for the past 5 years, a sharp, no-nonsense man who didn't waste time with pleasantries. If she was calling him at 1:17 a.m., he knew it wasn't for small talk. Sarah swallowed hard. "I need you to look at something." A beat of silence. Then, in that calm, measured tone of his, Gregory asked, "What happened?" She pressed her lips together, staring at the dashcam screen, watching herself, her own body on the ground, doing push-ups at gunpoint. Her voice was tight, strained. "Cops pulled me over. No reason. Made me get out, frisked me." She exhaled, pressing her fingers against her temple. "Then they made me do push-ups on the pavement." Another silence, but this one was heavier, charged. "You have it on video?" Gregory's voice was low, intense. Sarah's grip tightened. On the phone. Every second. Gregory exhaled sharply through his nose. She could practically see him rubbing his chin, his eyes narrowing in that way they did when he was piecing everything together. "Send it to me now. Don't post it. Don't say anything. Let me handle it." She didn't need to be told twice. She pulled up the footage and sent the full file. The moment it finished uploading, Gregory spoke again. "Listen to me carefully, Sarah." She straightened up, already knowing this was serious. "Do not delete anything. Not the original, not the backup, nothing. I'm calling in some favors first thing in the morning. We're not just going after them, Sarah. We're making sure this goes beyond a slap on the wrist." Her breath hitched. "You really think we can?" Gregory's voice was firm, unwavering. "They messed with the wrong person." She closed her eyes. She had money, power, influence. She was on the police oversight committee for the city. That meant those officers had no clue who they had just humiliated. That was their first mistake. And their second, thinking she was going to stay quiet about it. But the storm was just brewing. The sun had barely cracked the horizon when Sarah's phone buzzed again. She hadn't slept, not really. Just laid in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the stop over and over. But now, it was game time. She grabbed her phone. "Gregory?" She answered immediately. "Tell me you have something." His voice was sharper, more urgent than before. "Oh, I have something. More than something." Sarah sat bolt upright in bed. "Talk to me." Gregory exhaled, the rustle of papers in the background. "I sent the footage to a few key people before the department could even think about burying it. The mayor's office saw it. The chief saw it. And guess what?" Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. "Both of those officers, they're done." She sucked in a breath. Wait. Fired already?" "Not yet. But the chief is scrambling. The mayor's demanding answers. This isn't something they can sweep under the rug, Sarah." His voice lowered, heavy with meaning. "Especially not when one of their own committee members was the victim." Sarah ran a hand down her face, a wave of disbelief and something else, vindication, washing over her. It was happening. She swung her legs out of bed, pacing the room, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "So, what now?" Gregory didn't hesitate. "Press conference at noon. They're trying to get ahead of it, but I doubt it'll help. This is going viral, Sarah. It's bigger than just a couple of rogue cops." Her stomach twisted, not with fear, but with the weight of what this meant. She walked to her window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. "Do you think they regret it?" Gregory let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, they will." Sarah's phone buzzed again, a cascade of notifications flooding in. Messages, missed calls, social media exploding with discussions about police abuse, racial profiling, power trips. People were already talking about her case, and she hadn't even said a word publicly yet. She clicked on one of the news alerts. "Breaking. Indianapolis Police Department under fire after dashcam video surfaces." She inhaled sharply. It was real. It was happening. And by the end of the day, those officers would be jobless. But this fight wasn't just about them anymore. By noon, the press conference was everywhere. Sarah sat in her office at the table, watching the live stream on her laptop. Indianapolis Police Chief Robert Langley stood stiffly at the podium, his jaw clenched like he'd swallowed battery acid. "The actions of Deputy Miller and Officer Davies do not reflect the values of this department." His voice was measured, controlled, practiced. "Effective immediately, both officers have been terminated from duty." Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It was done. The same two officers who had laughed at her, humiliated her, held power over her for no reason other than because they could, were now stripped of their own power. But as she stared at the screen, listening to the carefully worded apology, something inside her told her this wasn't enough. Because for every case like hers that got justice, how many more were there that didn't? How many people had been stopped just like she was, humiliated, abused, but had no dashcam footage, no lawyer on speed dial, no connections to force accountability? Her fingers tapped restlessly against the desk. This couldn't just end here. Her phone buzzed, a text from Gregory. "We did what we set out to do, but I have a feeling you're not done yet." Sarah smirked. He was right. She closed her laptop and stood up, her reflection staring back at her from the diner's glass windows. She wasn't just a business owner. She wasn't just a committee member. She was someone who had been silenced before and refused to be silenced again. This wasn't just about her. This was about making sure no one else had to go through what she did. She picked up her phone and started dialing, because this was just the beginning. How many times have stories like this happened but never made it to the headlines? How many people have been mistreated and had no way to fight back? It's not just about one case. It's about the system that allows it to keep happening. If you see something, record it. Speak up. Demand accountability. Change doesn't happen by staying silent. What do you think? Should more people be using their influence to fight back against abuse of power? Drop your thoughts in the comments.